speaker is Dr. Larry Horvath. He's currently an associate professor in the Graduate College of Education at San Francisco State. Larry received his bachelor's degree from UC Davis in zoology and his master's in secondary education from San Francisco State. He's in good company here as he completed his Ph.D. in science education, yes, also from UC Davis. He has extensive experience teaching science at the middle school level, and both biology and chemistry at the high school level. Larry has been actively involved with multiple groups related to supporting science teacher education since 2007. And I first met Larry about 1 year ago when I joined a group called the Collaborative around Research Experiences for Teachers, for which Larry serves as the main representative from San Francisco State's Center for Science and Math Education. The project Larry and I, along with Dr. Elisa Stone here at UC Berkeley, are a part of, involves a literature review that will synthesize outcomes of research experiences for teachers based on studies published between 2007 and 2017. Our goal is to align this with a logic model and conceptual framework to be used in the design and evaluation of future teacher-researcher programs. Larry is currently the co-director of the Center for Science and Math Education at San Francisco State, and his research interests include science teacher identity, student engagement in classroom inquiry-based activities, and the impact of research experiences on teachers' practices in K-12 classrooms. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Larry Horvath.
Thank you all and welcome. And as I said, I'm working on my own identity today because that's why I get to work with students. Talk about that when I was teaching. So really nice to be here. I'll just do a quick kind of a local thing. I come to San Francisco State right across the bay. And it was the last thing I expected is to leave San Francisco when it was 84 degrees today at San Francisco State, which means all of our students are laying out on the quad because we don't get 84 degree days over on the coast. And coming here, it's also nice and warm. What that means. But I am planning on today to do a little bit of a talk, a little bit of it with about some of the things that Wally spoke about, but also have it be interactive. And my background is I taught for 13 years in the public schools, and I taught in private schools. I taught internationally for 6 years. So I've taught everything from middle school up to international baccalaureate, advanced placement, biology and chemistry in Europe. And I came back and decided to do my Ph.D. because what do you do when you come back? You want to go through, and I said I want to be able to teach teachers. So that's what got me to San Francisco State. So the teacher part of me has never gone away. The interesting thing is I have that researcher part of me that really gets fed with some of the work that I do with Wally and talk about. So I want to do two things before I get you guys started. Is I set the stage of letting you know that my talk had students figuring out themselves, just even learning frames in science classrooms. What does that mean? We'll try to figure that out today in here. But also, this work is built on I have a lot of collaborators, a lot of folks who I've worked with, and I'll share some names you'll see at the end, but my advisor, Dr. Cynthia Passmore, a lot of things you'll see in this presentation come out of her work, things that I did with her when I was doing my graduate work. We'll talk about that, because I don't know if I know about that in a second. A group at CSU East Bay called Next Gen ASET, and that's a research group, a research NIC, and I'll tell you what the NIC is in a bit, but how we're thinking about really supporting teachers with fundamental ways to embrace the idea of what it means to shift your classroom with tools to help them do so. And actually use those tools, one, research and development, and then research and practice. I'll show that. It's an interesting thing for any of you who are doing graduate work. And then last but not least, I work the program that Wally talked about, CARET. There's a program that I've been working with for about 7 years. It's a part of CARET, a big part of CARET. It's called the STEM Teachers as Researchers program. And the goal for that program is we get pre-service, that could be undergraduate, credential level STEM teachers, and sometimes even in service, depending on the timing, and get them into national laboratories to do research for a whole summer, 8 weeks, hopefully maybe 2 summers. And while they're doing the research, and it is research, it's original. It's not the idea that you're just in there supporting the mentor or the researcher, that you actually have your own program, build your own questions all the way through it. And then have a concurrent workshop supporting their views of how they're taking that research into the classroom. So lots of things coming together here that'll hopefully come clear as we do this little presentation today. So I need to know, I'll just take one thing. There's two. Let's do this first. First, how many of you are on the track to become teachers? So like pre-service, okay, any level. How many of you right now are grad students thinking science education and research? Okay, any in-service, current teachers? Okay, so a little bit of a mix there. And then I know I see some people saying in-service, pre-service, good. I'll try to think about that. And then now I want a thumbs down, thumbs in the middle. The next generation science standards, and this is not going to be a primer on the next generation science standards, but I do want to know if you guys had to say, are you kind of not familiar, little kind of medium familiar, or very familiar with the next gen? Can you guys all put up there and tell me where you're at with the next generation science standards? So lots, medium, little. Okay, got down, okay, okay, that's a good mix. Wow, that's great. Knowing that differentiating audience helps, but sometimes it's like, holy cow, maybe no. I think it should still be okay, so bad. Some people really know it, some people don't. All right. So then the best way to do this is, you're going to start with that. I'm actually going to give you data. We're going to play with the idea of data. And data can come, I think of data in lots of ways. In this case, it's going to be vignettes. Okay, and it's vignettes of a short written example of a classroom lesson. There's two. Does everybody have the handout with the two vignettes on it? And you can do this individually. Yeah, it's the first one, and it looks like this. I know if you can't see, you can go back. So it's 2 pages. I didn't put it up there, but 2 vignettes. Make sure you do. While I get that to you. Okay, the video instruction is read each one. I want you to think, as you read it, these 3 questions, and we will have a little discussion at the end. What are the students doing? What are the students learning? And how is science portrayed to students in this vignette? So think really focus on the science. How are those 2 vignettes? What's the first one kind of versus the second? And I'd say right now take about 4 minutes. Do that on your own. You can jot notes. This is yours to keep. I need it back. So for those 2, what are the students doing? What are the students learning? Kind of decide your own ideas about that, and I'll tell you what we do. So go ahead. Read away. Doing, learning, how is science portrayed? But minute and a half. Sorry, I know the time will be tight. I know it won't be enough for everybody. Maybe too much for some. Thirty seconds. Did I wind it down? And again, it's always the case when any of these talks happen, I'm going to try to model some things that I've done in the classroom. I teach the science methods course at San Francisco State, and things like that, so practices, and discourse is a must, so classrooms have to be noisy places. It should be productive noise, but I'm hoping you guys can do that now. So find a partner next to you and discuss your answers. Make sure, as you talk about what are students doing, learning, and science is, and we bring this up to the whole group, talk to it a little bit. What do you think are the differences or some of the similarities between those two vignettes? So find somebody and talk.
Okay, so something that caught my eye instantly when I read the second one was just the students, they started collecting
I managed to get into it.
and that's instantly what about. And I know in the first one, they were okay, what do you know about it? But here, that's a different place of generating knowledge. So, not just like go up and then maybe that was something
but the interactive part, of course, I love it. This is one of the layers. And then, also just the conclusion
Give about 1 more minute, and we'll bring it up to the whole group.
really sharing it with people, like, okay, that show me like science and
yeah, that is true. Like instead of saying, okay, here it is in a book memorized, this is a word to take. Even though they're maybe not taking the data here, they are both examples of using interactive.
All right, begin to wrap up your conversation.
Instead of just saying like, I'm going to talk about my system. Tell me about it. Both of them are positive. So creating data knowledge drives in a partnership.
All right. I know, again, never enough time. But go ahead, wrap up, and don't worry, we'll come back to these. This won't be the end. But I'm curious now, from the first tape, as you look at those two, and we'll think about this, how do we contrast these lessons? But what comes to your mind? No right or wrong answers. That's not the case. That's not under judgment. But ideas or thoughts around it. You guys can raise your hands or just shout out. And I'm not going to be like, if you don't raise your hand, don't talk. I taught middle school. I can do that. No. Molly?
They're collecting data at number 2.
Number 2, they're collecting data. So it's an interesting point. They're actually engaged in what somebody might consider to be collecting data. Sure. Other pieces.
Letting the data drive the next question?
Yeah, letting the data. So what they're doing is driving what they're doing. Data driving. So there's that piece. How about anything for number 1? Or number 2 again? Yes?
I thought one big contrast between the two vignettes is that with number 1, the lesson is everything is very isolated. There's no connection being made between all the different pieces.
Yeah.
So, for example, previously the students were looking at the order of the planets, and then the next day the teacher announces we're going to do moon phases, and that it's just very disconnected. Whereas with vignette 2, there's this clear kind of building up towards this lesson on moon phases. It kind of arises organically from everything being kind of knitted or integrated together.
So the idea of scaffolding in number 2 versus decontextualized maybe in number 1?
Yeah,
So no technology.
number 1 definitely feels very
Okay.
contextualized.
More thoughts?
Maybe science is a collection of data or information as opposed to science as an inquiry.
Yeah, okay, science is it's a set of data we're getting, so the two things, science is a collection of facts or that versus data coming out. Any other thoughts? I'm good with wait time, so I can do that. Yeah.
In number one, one thing that's cool about the idea generation phase is that the student's prior knowledge is valued. Like, what do you already know?
It is valued. It's no, but there's a word there. It's what do you already know? And then what are you going, after we check in with what you know, when you're done, what are you also going to know? So I will throw out, if I'm going to do a scouting question, who seems to be more in charge in the different vignettes, teachers or students? If anybody picked that, I mean, where is that coming from? Which one do you think, is there a difference between the two in terms of the main person or the main force actually driving the lesson? What do y'all think? Yes?
I think number one is very teacher-driven, and the students are sort of coming along for the ride.
Yep.
Whereas number two, it's teacher-guided, but the students are the ones really driving a lot of, the coming up with the inquiry question, collecting data, making sense of that data, coming to an understanding, reaching a class consensus about the representation they want to use. So it's very much student-driven,
Okay.
but
So
still
maybe,
guided by the teacher.
and does anybody have any other thoughts or views on that? Because I'm going to ask, just out of curiosity, how many of you guys feel like you've actually been in a classroom and had lesson number one done with you as a student? Anybody? Okay.
Most of them.
Most of them. I mean, you feel, okay, lesson number one, feel more familiar. Lesson number two? Any of you ever thought or something like that? Do you feel like you experienced? And by the way, this is, and I know you're not from California, this is right in the middle of the middle school standards for California. Everybody. The phase of the moon is a critical component for the old California state standards. I mean, you guys come through it. Anybody have something like that or any experiences that fit more? Yeah?
Well, sort of precisely the opposite. I didn't have an experience, but I see kids in the neighborhood, generations younger,
Okay.
running around with their notepads,
Trying to do, okay.
And it's one of the things that strikes me about the structure of two is that it plays out over all this time, and like obviously look every day and take notes of the month, and so just how that reshapes your approach to classroom management and what you're going to get done, and the time frames that you need to plan. It's more complex and way more exciting, but no doubt more complex.
The planning piece is another piece you get into, and length of time. And things that we have to compress in a classroom if we want our students to really understand the phase of the moon. By the way, if I really push at that, we know there's a lot of misconceptions about the phase of the moon. So I'm not going to ask you all about your misconceptions or your conceptions, but we can do that as you play with these ideas. But I am going to show you student work today, so you can take a look at that a little bit from this perspective. But I heard the talking, I'm going to condense a little bit. We're thinking as we move into the next generation science standards, but also we've always thought about inquiry and student-driven work. There's a frame, and the old California framework, and a simple way I say to think about this is that there was a frame, and that top frame is kind of knowing stuff. Yeah, and I heard that. You guys said students will know when they're done. The teacher directs, and students will know the phase of the moon. What happens is when we use that frame, oftentimes when we really dig into what the students know, we find out that their conceptions of the phase of the moon maybe haven't changed at all based on what they originally thought. And there's a lot of things, if you've observed, we observe the world all the time. If you observe the world, of course, the sun is not stationary. The sun moves across. There's really obvious things out there that we go like, oh, that's not the way it is. Same thing with the phase of the moon. What do we see? And what does that look like? And it's also the piece of you think about this. So these two lessons where you really want students engaged, framing these two things as a knowing frame, not necessarily wrong, maybe not really well aligned with how students learn in the way, I know, maybe good for taking a test and getting able to remembering and deep thinking and being able to explain and teach to somebody else, versus a frame of figuring out. So, and you brought some of these, so some of these things with vignette 1 and vignette 2, and I'm going to go through this a little faster rather than inquiry, because of time issues, but in vignette 1, it's centered on information frame for instruction, teacher directed, teacher centered, students will know. That's not necessarily a bad thing. That's what a lot of you have done. It can be successful. It can be critiqued. So maybe we could do that, and we'll try that a little bit later today. Vignette 2 is centered on sense-making frame. So we want, instead of just students knowing and being told, given a diagram, here is the phase of the moon. Here's what you're going to learn, and then move on to the next topic next day. We want students to take lessons that are scientifically framed. It takes a lot more time, but students to figure it out and make sense using data, actually really driving the investigation. So students are focused on knowing information, students are focused on understanding. We do think that's a critical piece. I don't know how you guys feel about that. I'm going to push this a little bit more. So right now I'm putting these up there. It's not really like straw men to be knocked down, but yeah. So first frame, knowing. Although it's the one probably a lot of you are familiar with. This frame I think has been very popular in science education and science classrooms for a long time in this state and others. Versus students are focused on understanding. And what does that mean? There's a scaffolding. And the idea of science, and this is the piece that gets to me. One of the other areas of research I do is thinking about the nature of science, how we understand. It's kind of a theory of knowledge, how science is practiced by scientists, and what does that mean? And oftentimes we think one of the big misconceptions is science is portrayed in science classrooms as a set of static facts that you memorize. They're in a book, but it's not the changing, vibrant discipline and the way it works. If any of you spend time in labs, I don't know if all you have, and watching science practices, that you get no conception of that. The messiness of what it means to do science and really know. It's kind of sterile. This is it, we know it, here are the facts, here's what you learn. And the goal here is science portrays a way of making sense of something, which can be messy, can be scary for teachers. But I think if any of you get the opportunity, and as we work with next generation science and those of you who teach, it can be really powerful in a classroom. It actually can help your classroom management. That's the one for the beginning teachers who go, like, really? Have them talking and doing? Yeah, when they're engaged and they believe they're empowered and they get to make the decisions and they do that data, it changes the dynamics of your classroom, but also changes the amount of things where, in terms of you having to manage, yes, there's certain ways you have to change and shift your management. We talk about that a little more. But a lot of times the classroom manages itself, for the most part, the way you set your lessons and do it. So we've got this vignette, we've got the vignette too. There they are. So what we like to do is both frames are important. It's the hardest thing to do. I get to work with, I work with student teachers, I work with teachers in the classroom, and it's really hard to think that we're really going to critique that first frame, which is still common. It's the way a lot of teachers teach. They've been very successful with it in lots of ways in terms of their students moving on and maybe understanding, conceptually understanding science. We also find that it has not done that much in terms of changing misconceptions about and getting really a fully scientifically literate public. I'll ask you, any of you ever seen the video called Minds of Their Own, or A Private Universe by the Annenberg Foundation, 1994, where they actually tested some of these questions on graduates of MIT and Harvard? If you like to make fun of graduates of MIT and Harvard, watch the video. It does not make them shine very much in terms of like some of the actions, but it's the idea of what students should be able to know if they're scientifically literate. These kind of questions, if you ask students about the phases of the moon and the reasons of the seasons, if you ask adults, they're challenged by these questions. Even though they're taught in classrooms, they've been taught in classrooms in science for millennia. They've been the cornerstone. But we ask graduates of top universities, they struggle. Lots of things that they struggle with. So that's kind of the piece there that we're looking at. So while both frames for instruction are important, research and personal experience shows that most teachers are very good at information, throwing stuff at students. And what most teachers need help with is the sense-making frame. And the case that we make is, it's the core of the next generation science standards. It's the core of what we'd love to see in classrooms. And we're seeing now more so, and we're thinking it actually fits really how students learn. We also think it really fits how science is practiced. But we know we need to support teachers tremendously in making this shift. So how do we do it? And that's not, it's a rhetorical question at the moment, but we'll move towards that a little bit today. Some of the things that we're doing. So, and just to reaffirm that real quick. This is the next generation science that has the students engage in science to learn. It's absolutely clear. This is from the framework published in 2011. The NGSS framework was based on a tremendous amount of research from the National Science Education Standards, human cognition, how we learn. And science is not just a body of knowledge that reflects current understandings of the world. It is also a set of practices used to establish, extend, and refine that knowledge. Both elements, knowledge and practice, are essential. So you can't separate the science that you understand from how you actually figure it out. And NGSS is actually that any of you who teach that you're going to do that in your classroom. You're going to be a science teacher, any STEM teacher. I'm going to go a little further and I'll stop for a sec. So science is both a body of knowledge and a set of practices focused on understanding the natural world. And I'm not talking pedagogy. I'm not talking the way you teach. I'm talking the way science is practiced, driving the way you teach. So I'll stop for a second. Are there any questions? Because I like to have that if there's something like from that. I was giving you quite a bit of stuff, throwing it at you myself. But any questions? Take a second. Thoughts? Yes.
Well, it seems particularly relevant to, if you look at the first statement there, science is not just a body of knowledge, it reflects current understanding, set of practices versus a set of practices. It seems to me like since we're in an era where there's such expanded and immediate access to current understandings of the world,
Yes.
the body of knowledge, that there'd be this shifting emphasis towards a set of practices that you know, is particularly appropriate for this rising generation of like sort of digitally literate internet kids.
There's two. There's the piece that yes, I mean they have access to a lot of facts, or we hope. Again, we always know that part of anything in science is being able to parse through all the information on the internet, what's facts or what's not around certain, especially some controversial items. So how the goal is to get them, you know, the functional goal, I'll use three terms that maybe you're familiar with, is the idea of claim, evidence, and reasoning. So it's that making the claim, what is the claim, what's the data, what's the evidence, and what's the reasoning behind it. And that's empowering for students to actually deal with that, so that is absolutely mapped onto the NGSS. How is that empowering? How does that help? How do we kind of make the way we think about science deeper rather than shallower, especially in the context you give some of the controversy and all that information out there. So claim, evidence, and reasoning. So all right, and this is just for your bit. There's so much. I'm not going to go through all the practices. I'm just going to focus on one, honestly. But I want to show you. This is from the NGSS. If you all have that sheet, you don't have to read it out now. But it's the idea. This is gleaned from scientists. So science and engineering practices from the NGSS website. There's 8 practices that are considered core for the way scientists actually do science. And yes, in some ways, these practices have replaced what we used to call inquiry. Because inquiry had kind of a bad reputation, if any of you were in grad school studying it. Inquiry is a passé term. It's still, I think, relevant in terms of how we think of science. There's 8 practices. Asking questions, developing and using models. And I'll highlight number 2 is going to be interesting in a moment. Planning and carrying out its investigations, analyzing and interpreting data, using mathematics and computational thinking, constructing explanations for science and designing solutions, engaging in argument from evidence. Yes, we want our students in our classrooms to engage in argument, scientific argument. And for any of you guys want to be middle school teachers? Really? No, if you do, I did, by the way, I have to come up and be totally honest. When I finished my student teaching, I swore in blood I would never teach middle school. Before I became a teacher, I was a primate behavior researcher. I was very science oriented. So I was going into field biology. Everybody has those kind of shifts in your lives when you figure out, I wanted to be Jane Goodall, I really did. Mm-hmm. It's really hard to be Jane Goodall or Diane Fossey, and field biology is an incredibly isolating, challenging thing to do. I actually got my chance to do it out at the California Primate Research Center, just west of UC Davis. You guys all know that the biggest primate research center is right in the middle of Central Valley, only about 40 miles from here. It's out in the Central Valley, so yeah, it's not well advertised when you think about why that is so. But I didn't want to be a middle school teacher either. I ended up being a middle school teacher because in 1986 that was the only job available, and I went with, and this is how it happened. So for those of you who are thinking about being teachers, it happened because the vice principal at the high school I was student teaching at, which was Petaluma High School just north of here, became the principal of a middle school and said, Larry, I need a middle school science teacher. Like, okay, sure. I'm going to teach biology. That's all I wanted to do. But it was the first job, and I swear, in the long run, it made me a far better teacher as a middle school teacher because I got to know my students. I got to understand context. I got to work with students who, actually it was a very diverse middle school. We served a military base, so we had a really diverse student population. I ended up loving it. I think in the long run, it made me a better teacher, but that idea of middle school out there. But engaging in argument from evidence, I just had one of my students who finished her master's who developed Socratic seminars in her 7th grade classroom and taught her students to engage in scientific arguments. Amazing stuff, and video, actually did cut the IRB, which is crazy. Was able to videotape and interview them about how they thought, well, what it was like to make their own claim, evidence, and reasoning, and actually run arguments and vet them in their classroom. Really, and it was really powerful for them. I wish you guys could see that and do it, because it's incredible. And the last thing, obtaining and valuable community information. So you have all 8. I'm not going to talk about all 8. You have this is for your information. You can ask me questions later, but I'm not going to go with that. So what we are going to do is I'm going to shift to the way the NGSS, it's different. There's a set of standards. You all know standards. What will students know? And you do this, any teacher, you go, what do I want my students to know? How am I going to assess them? How am I going to write a test? How am I going to set up some kind of project, whatever it might be? The NGSS do this very different. So this is the actual standard, the way it's written in the NGSS for this vignette. Okay? So it's very specific. It's called a performance expectation. That means we don't want students to know stuff, we want them to be able to perform. We want them to be able to show us what they can do and how they know it. So here's the way this expectation is set up. Develop and use a model of the Earth, Sun, Moon system to describe the cyclic patterns of lunar phases, eclipses of the sun and moon, and seasons. There you go. And so the students have to do that. They have to actually do that developing. We want them to be able to do that and show that. Clarification statement. Examples of models can be physical, graphical, and conceptual. Can I lob one at you? So which practice do you think we're going to focus on in here right now? If you look at all the practices on your sheet, or if I go back, I can go back. With this statement, which one? Yes. Yeah, developing using models. I'm just going to play around with models. We can do all of them. You can't do all of them all the time in any class, but modeling that, and I'm going to propose to you, is a real fundamental thing that scientists do, and that you're asking students to do it, but it's a little tricky. So modeling is just a little tricky. So I'm going to say modeling is it's using and understanding a set of ideas that can help us explain a phenomenon. I'm going to highlight the word explain. If you all did that activity, and I'm going to have you play with this in a second, that second vignette, you could make models, stick and balls and all those pieces. And how many of you guys ever made, I'm going to get ahead of myself. This modeling is like this, but the movement yet modeling is the only model that could. How many of you guys made models like this in your classroom? Any of you make those? Remember making like a model of a cell? Remember making a model of the solar system? Not to scale, although you can make a scale model, get out in the street and do that. There's ways to do it, really interesting things. Or, you've seen the classic model of DNA. But those are not the type of models we're talking about. But for teachers, a lot of them, this is what they see, and students think those are models. The key thing to the models that we want students to be able to create, like scientists, are students are mentally grappling with a set of ideas which you can explain. They've got to be able to explain. They've got to be able to use the claims and the evidence and the reasoning. And how do we set up classrooms where students explain phenomena, it's a funny word, but explain the world out there through modeling is one way, but doing all those other pieces, asking questions, practicing like scientists. And now I'm going to have you guys try it again. I've spoken enough, so it's time for you to do something. So, again with your partner, and I'm going to go, I know the timing of this, you all have a set of, this is actual student work from students who did Vignette 2. They were taught that way. So this is data from work that we were doing, I'll tell this at UC Davis, Sacramento Area Science Project, in classroom with some really brave earth science teachers. And they were working, they were working with freshmen, 9th grade, and they taught that second vignette, they taught it that way. And by the way, there's some critiques on the vignette, we can talk, if you have questions with it. Some things about do that, but either way. And this was some of the things, the diagrams that were generated from being taught that way. What I'd like you and a partner to do is take a little time now to figure out what do you think the underlying conceptions are of these 3 diagrams, each one. And do you think all the students have fundamentally the same idea for how phases work or not? Just from the picture. You don't get the students to talk, you just get the picture. And And we'll talk a little bit, the third bullet, I should write up, we'll talk about that in a second, where it's to refine a class version. Right now, just parse those out. What do you think? Talk to a partner, take about 4 minutes. What do you think about those 3 models that you have? Real student work samples, students who were taught through just like Vignette 2. What do you think? Talk to a partner. Do you think those students, what are the fundamentals? Do they all have the same idea or do they not?
So this
I wonder if there was some kind of textbook or like I don't know where this came from, but it's definitely very explained this. There are some ways, yeah, I don't know, but there's something there. And then you know, so there's got to be some kind of property.
Yeah, I read it.
So it's basically, I feel
or just a set of observations without being
So actually, these are 2 different representations of the same thing, but they are
why would you say, yeah, exactly.
I don't want to say like but like complex or 2 different ways.
And that's what I was lacking.
But this is key. This little.
I didn't connect.
No, it shows.
Okay, about 30 seconds. Go ahead and wrap up. All right. Now, since I've just taken you all back to your middle school science experience, what it was to learn the phase of the moon, but it's interesting, I'm curious, I'm going to go through each one of these, and that third question is, as you look at those 3 diagrams, students gave, and you don't get to hear their voice, you get to see it, what are some of the things that you looked at in terms of thinking about how, what you gather those students, their beginning understandings, some of the beginning understandings of the phases of the moon. So diagram 1, what do you guys think, or any thoughts about this one? In terms of what those students, what do you think they see, how they see the phase of the moon from that diagram? Yeah, yes. Your teacher training. Yes.
So I think they're having trouble distinctly making the distinction between what the phases of the moon look like from Earth and what they look like in space.
Really hard. 2 things, you got that, this diagram, Earth versus space. I love they got some cool things there. But what does that look like? That whole idea of where are they going to position themselves on that diagram to give their explanation? So maybe, do you think this one's there? Is it a complete, you think they have a really complete or partial understanding? You'd have to guess.
They have a good amount of information. I mean, aside of where they place themselves, but they seem to understand it about the relationships between orbit and rotation.
Yeah, they got ideas about orbit and rotation. They got some really good ideas there, and I think it's some really solid ideas. They're getting there, but maybe not all the way there unless we ask and we check. Okay, so that's diagram one. Anything else about diagram one? Yes?
Well, I think there might also be this interesting issue of you have students understanding conceptually of moon phases and how that happens. And maybe, but then also another issue that's kind of mixed in with this is their proficiency at representing that understanding in
Really?
a diagram that
Yeah.
has to convey three-dimensional spatial.
Yeah, how do we represent? We just have to draw a picture.
Yeah.
And that three-dimensional piece where they've been working with three-dimensional objects, if you read that, and then representing, this is a tricky thing with models, and it's scientists struggle with the same piece. How do you represent? And you guys see this in textbooks. I mean, I'd be the first one if I gave you all the misrepresentation or representation in textbooks that you've seen that kind of might push you to sing, especially the Earth, Sun, Moon dynamic or the solar system dynamic, like the seasons, elliptical orbits. As you know, the elliptical orbit of the Earth around the Sun is pretty much a circle, but textbooks tend to spread that out, which gives us a lot of ideas. So absolutely, and one other comment, I think.
Yeah, I was going to say diagram one also includes this notion that both the Earth and the Moon have their own and distinct orbits.
I think that's huge.
Or,
There's things, this is when we look at that positive, there's a lot of really thoughtful ideas here, even if they're not all the way through. As teachers, this is going to be really critical we think about that, because we look at, I'll flip up diagram 2. What do you guys think about this one? I'm really curious. This group's thinking, the students, as they draw their. Yes?
They could think that the moon actually changes in size and the whole thing is illuminated continuously.
Yeah, you have enough. So they've got an idea here of phases, but you don't have that other diagram. There's things about the orbit, things about the positionality, other pieces. Lolly, you have one?
I was
That's
just,
the only name I know. I don't know. What's your
no,
name?
it's okay. I was just gonna say, to me, this looks like drawings that you might do while taking observations. Like you might have something like this in your lab notebook, maybe as like a preliminary step to understanding.
Yeah, and okay, keep going before I start things. Because if I saw this with my students, I think this is probably, if I'm looking at their real experience, what's going to reflect their real experience with the moon? Diagram 1 or diagram 2? Or your real experience? What do you see?
Yeah.
Line 2, this is really kind of digging into the real experience. So you get these ideas of names and things like that, but this is what we see. If you get up there, you see it during the day, during the night, that whole issue. Okay. And I want to check time. How much more?
Good?
Good. Okay. And so then we get to diagram 3. We all think about this diagram. Yes.
So this one, there could be a perception that depending on where you are on the Earth will determine what moon phase you see.
Sure. What shows you that on this diagram? What do they have there for you? There's some really neat information on that. Sure, anybody. Well, if you want to, if you got it, go for it.
Well, I mean, there's the dotted line that shows the Earth perspective and
The Earth
what's going to be
perspective.
seen.
They've really put down that moon perspective. The dotted line's about what part is, how is that facing, recognizing that the moon's orbit pretty much matches, it's orbiting, but it's staying in that one piece. That's why we have the dark side of the moon. They're really starting to dig it in. As a teacher, you recognize those pieces, and again, you'd have the conversations with the students and think about where they are with these diagrams they are developing. I'd call these models, but I think they don't stand on their own. You have to really get into student thinking. There'd be a lot of writing, talking, arguing, all those pieces to think about what it looks like and what causes the phase of the moon. So you got 3 diagrams there, I think really different. I don't know if I think of one any better than the other, but they really show you ways. And it is fascinating, actually, when we work with students who talk through this and talk about their views and talk about how this might go up against your own personal views. I'm not going to ask you all, but a lot of times, many of your students still think that what do they think? What's the most common misconception about the phase of the moon? It's caused by what? The shadow of the Earth on the moon. That's real common, and we know that that's not the case. And how do we get students to? And even so, we can do a lot of textbook, knowing stuff. Will not change that at all. They'll take a test. Your students will be great. Mr. Hart, we'll tell you exactly what you've told us on the test. But when you really sit us down and ask us to do this stuff, we're going to come right back to what really fits our experience, which makes a lot of sense. So any other comments? Anybody, any things with these 3 diagrams before we move on and do a couple of little more things? Yes.
I just have a question, but did you say all 3 diagrams came from a Vignette 2 cell?
Vignette 2.
So it's very, what was surprising for me is when I saw diagram 2,
Yeah.
I immediately assumed it must be a Vignette 1.
Yeah, it seems like, but you never, again, you don't, as a teacher, predicting that, but Vignette 2, and remember there's a description, there's the piece that I can't give you is, the students are asked to engage in explanation and engage in claim, evidence, and reasoning and really show the levels of their argumentation. So there is that part that isn't there, but you figure, and is there more to diagram 2 than we know in terms of that piece of going back and figuring, I can explain, this is what I see, and their explanation can be a lot more richer than the diagram itself.
Right.
I don't know that.
Right.
You can't assess that, but you can't, that's the hardest thing, is getting into their heads, and we need to do that as teachers. The explanation along with the model, this is what modeling is all about. It's not the model, it's the explanatory power of it and how the explanations are used to predict. Can they predict, future events? And do they actually deal with any kind of discrepancies or new data that comes up? So that's it. And this is like the teaching moment. Can I put this up there? Modeling is an anchor practice. Modeling is a directed anchor. So at midnight, I picked that as the anchor. I don't know if that's the best representation, because anchor is supposed to be like something strong and sturdy that holds it together, not something that drags it to the bottom of the ocean. But that was my visual piece. But the idea of modeling in terms of those 8 practices, a lot of work that the folks that I'm going to give thanks to at the end of this think that modeling really helps. If you set up your classroom and think about vignettes like this, think about ways to engage students in explaining phenomena and developing these kind of models and drawing pictures and arguing and setting that up, you will be able to do this. This is a really complex slide. Okay. So all 8 practices, if you focus on one practice, all the other practices are there, really focusing, developing models will entice your students to engage in all 7 of the other ones. And I won't break that out, I'll let you look at it in a second, but it's the goal of model-based reasoning. And modeling, that's one reason why we have groups studying model-based reasoning in science. How does that map onto the NGSS? We know the goal is that students do all the practices, but possibly doing something like this particular activity. And we have lots of vignettes, we've done lots of idea of narrative tics. Does somebody have a question in the back? No. Okay. Stop me from talking. But those pieces that will bring all those together, that and finding ways to get students in your classrooms, students in science classrooms to figure stuff out. And they are really interested in figuring out, where does all the mass of a tree come from? Can I light a battery with a single wire and a bulb? I can. Can I light a bulb with a single wire and a C battery? How much can you see on a mirror? If I have a flat mirror on the wall over there, and I get closer or farther away, am I going to see more or less of myself? Think about that one, look it up on the internet if you want to, you can Google it. I'll tell you right now, if you look at a flat mirror on the wall, no matter how far back or far you go, you're only going to see the same amount of you. So there's a lot of things, but there's so many things about science. It's a wonderful thing. So how do we get students to instruct? And then we do, by the way, there's big models out there. Yes?
I just want to ask you a question about sort of a personal question. One of the things that strikes me about somebody like you is that you're trained as a scientist,
Yes.
biological science, and
Yes.
you're a social scientist.
Yeah.
And to what degree do you feel like that the kind of in education that there are, it's a much more robust conversation about new teaching models within the sciences than in social studies and humanities. Do you feel that?
I think, okay, yeah, and this is the kind of conversation, and I'll answer all that now, but I can hold that to the end. Because, where I do my work at the universities, I was a K-12, I taught middle and high school, but also I work with science faculty. I juggle, so I'm in the College of Education at San Francisco State, but I'm the first College of Education faculty ever invited to be on the Science Council. So we also work with undergraduate science education. I have some amazing chemistry educator. We hired a chemistry educator just one, but that was a big deal. We have a biology educator on campus, Kimberly Tanner, and really think about what this means for undergraduate education, what it means to prepare teachers to teach K-12, and what does it mean to prepare professors and faculty to teach undergrads, and even graduate students. So we're pushing that. And the conversations are really interesting. Sometimes they're challenging, but sometimes you get some really passionate folks out there. We just hired a physics educator, Kimberly Caldwell, amazing work, and we're actually putting an ASET grant to totally reform our undergraduate introductory physics class and design it like it's preparing teachers to teach the NGSS, literally. And look in that kind of grant, and then what does that mean for our other physics faculty to see an introductory physics class is designed to have students do the kind of work I showed you around physics. So that is a great conversation, and it brings up with the work we're doing with Lala and the work I'll show you here. So I want to do two more quick things, and I'll take a question. That's a great question. Yes?
Regarding the power of models, you see a difference, or what is the difference between using a model or developing one?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I think the developing is actually critical. And that's where I'm going to call this research and development. And we think about it, the practice is develop and use models, not just use. Because use, I think it's very easy to fall back on the idea that we'll show students the model of the solar system. Show them. We have that all the time. We've been doing that. And then they'll figure out, show them the model, tell them how to use it, and then they'll know the phases of the moon. I think it's just really easy to fall back on that piece. But if they develop it, it's that thinking like a scientist to actually be able to explain how that model works. Through that development piece, we think that's a necessary part of how the human brain works. I can go back to Piaget, the idea of constructivism. There's a deeper conversation. But in terms of memory and the way we take things in and we're able to use it, we need to be in that development. We need to actually participate in that development piece for our brains to go, okay, I'm really going to hold that deeply, and it might change some of the ways I would look at the world. So I'll push. I'll ask you the question I always ask. All of you are here because you've been very successful in our educational system. And I always ask the question, how many of you have gotten an A in a class and realized that when you were done, you don't really remember any of it? A's in classes and don't remember, okay, we got that. Well, what does that mean in terms of the way we've taught and how we learn? And that setup, and I think it can mean lots of things. I don't want to set on that, but if we keep doing the piece where we're very good at taking information out of a textbook, repeating it back on a test that's designed to do that, where's that deep understanding, and where's the things that I would do to challenge your thinking and how you see the world?
But there is a certain amount of discovery when using an existing model. So you would say that it goes...
Yeah, there's two, okay. Tell me if I'm on the right track. They can't always create every single model. So you're right, we have to work within models that the common way we already understand science. So we pick and choose. This is something that we look for anchor phenomena that it's much more acceptable or easy for students to develop and build those models with fundamental ideas about science versus having students build the models for climate change. But we do have, I'll show you, the NGSS does not shortchange this. Students will need to be able to develop and critique some of the models that actually really feed the idea of climate change and go back and understand the idea of the greenhouse effect. They do, but you're right, they're not going to have to rediscover photosynthesis. So it's a fine line about picking those ones that they do and actually thinking like scientists to do it. But that's where we're thinking less content because of that, and then deeper, and we really go for it. Does that help a little bit? Picking the ones you do. Yeah. Okay. One other quick thing. Do I have like 2 minutes?
Plenty of time.
In here, I handed you something out. You don't have to fill it out, just to show you research. Many of you, it's the one that says the next gen asset. And I would have you now, if we have the time, because there's 3 things to think of this particular tool. And this is a research tool. It's developed to do 2 things. So it's one, it's gone through multiple iterations, like through me being videotaped, teaching my methods class, having my students use it to really think about it. But it's the idea that our goal is to get teachers to develop lessons that engage their students in developing and using models. So this tool can be used for 3 things. 1, I can give it to you now for you guys to critique that lesson, that the aspects that we break down that need to be present for this is developing using models is 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, all those different aspects. Are they present or not in this activity? Or if you went and watched that teacher's classroom, and you watch that teacher practice, you could actually use this as an observation tool. Are those things present? What's the teacher doing? What are the students doing around developing and using models? Or you can use them like I use with my students. They can use these to actually say, I've developed my lesson plan or my unit plan, and here's how I'm having my students. I'm making sure that they are engaged in developing and using models because of what I'm writing here to check myself. And I can't do all those aspects. So it's the kind of tool, and this is with a group that I'm working with called Next Gen ASET. I won't show you the website at the time, but a research group out of CSU East Bay. And again, getting these tools, hopefully developing for all of the practices. We have it for 4 that help teachers, 1, develop NGSS aligned units and check themselves in lessons. 2, if as a science methods instructor, I can support my students so they can recognize when it's being done, really help them learn what it's like to do it. And 3, we can use this as an instrument to see if it's happening. So those are the kind of things that when you think about what does it mean to develop instruments, here's one that's in development. It's kind of there. I think it's doing better. What would be like to fill that out? You guys have to practice with it a little bit. We don't have time to do it to see what that is. And last, I'll take time for questions. The work that's tied to what Holly talked about is the STEM Teachers as Researchers program. I'm not going to click on it. The STAR program. Again, how do we get future science teachers to really do this in classrooms? Well, we put them in science labs doing science. Actually seeing how scientists construct and develop and use models and doing it themselves. And we're finding right now, we're in the early stages of investigating. We have an NSF grant called a Noise Track 4 grant to really research what's the impact of having teachers go into classrooms. Do they do these kind of things in their classrooms? Do they feel like it's really almost an imperative to have their students to understand and learn science, to engage in developing and using models, collecting and analyzing data? And we're finding that it most likely does. But we don't, again, like any good scientist, and this is, it's NSF, sure, we're social scientists, but we're scientists too, is we need to actually get that data. That's challenging research to do. For any of you guys doing research in education, doing research in schools, David Berliner, who's a really thoughtful educational psychologist, wrote a paper. And again, scientists tend to be sometimes, I'm trained as an evolutionary biologist, and there's critiques, like if you talk to a physicist and evolutionary biologist, it can get a little testy because the physicists will say, what you do as an evolutionary biologist is not really science, because you can't do experiments on the past. You're right. But that's kind of like fighting words between evolutionary biologists and physicists. By the way, it plays out in the Big Bang Theory, because physicists also make fun of geologists, again, because they have to practice the way they practice. But it's the whole bit is, how do we get our kind of lost my, went the wrong way, kind of lost my train of thought. How do we get future teachers to think like scientists, believe that they are scientists, and kind of science, we call it a teacher scientist, and then do this stuff in the classroom. That's the goal of STAR. I wanted to make sure I gave credit to my advisor, Dr. Cynthia Passmore and Rich Hedman. A lot of that work with the vignettes was done with them. I worked with them quite a bit on this when I was a grad student. The group at CSU East Bay with the Next Gen ASET, and then the folks that actually do STAR, which is down in Cal Poly. Again, opportunities to get, we put future teachers and current teachers in labs. We put them here at Lawrence Berkeley. We have had them in the past. We have them at Stanford, SLAC, JPL. We have them at NASA Ames. We have them at NOAA. Some of the times you think it's really exciting. We've had them out doing research on turtles in the Virgin Islands. We've had them out on Channel Islands, so it's a really cool program. But they really do science. They really practice. They do presentations, they publish papers, and then they go into their classrooms and they teach. So I will stop there and take questions if you have any. Do we have a little time or no?
Yeah.
Yes.
Time for questions? Okay. Ran that through. So that's it for me. So any? Yes.
Thoughts on how to deal with the time factor? So one of the things that you pointed out earlier between these two vignettes is, one's taking, over a month and the other is maybe a day or two.
Yeah.
So how is a teacher to manage content and the time and the depth and.
Here's the key. I can answer that, and I can say we have to still wait and see if my answer is going to hold up. Two, the two ways to look at that. The next generation science standards are designed, they do not have the content diversity. The content has been shrunk tremendously. Any of you chemistry teachers in here? We had one chemistry. Ask your chemistry teacher at school what they think about it. If they look at the NGSS and how chemistry is framed in the NGSS, they will argue chemistry has really come back hard because the NGSS, the disciplinary core ideas, kind of the content, are broken up into the life sciences, the physical science, earth and space science, and then basically engineering and technology. So chemistry has been subsumed in just the physical sciences, and they think it's really been shortchanged. So there's issues with the amount of content, maybe, but the content has been shrunk and we're looking at depth. And I think the real key is that performance expectation. When we look at how students are going to be assessed, it really matters that, and it allows for the kind of time we need to do this. Instead of rushing them through, instead of covering content, having that the term, yes, a 4-week unit on something that's really meaningful, something that's contextually driven. For example, we have a group of students, I can give you the kind of lesson that this would be, up north in China Camp. You guys know where China Camp is on San Francisco Bay? It's in Marin County. Just about 4 or 5 years ago, there was a huge die-off of the oyster population. By the way, these are not the nice oysters that you eat live on like happy hour night. These are little tiny oysters. They're the local native species, but they're a keystone species. They're really a species that gives you a lot of idea of the health. They just died off. Now, nobody knew this was happening, but one of the labs we work is the Romberg Tiburon Center, which is a marine lab on San Francisco Bay. So a couple of the scientists there, just by sheer luck, walking at low tide around China Camp, noticed like, where the hell did all the oysters go? Really? It's kind of like serendipity. So they did all this stuff, but at the same time, we were doing a little professional development with a group of K-8, like 50 kindergarten through 8th grade teachers. The 8th grade teachers got to get this data when it was still raw and actually do this with their students to look at something that was relevant. These are Sanderfeld students, so it's their oysters. It's their oysters and their thing, and so they actually did this for like 3 weeks. And they felt it was totally worthwhile to actually collect all the data, do all the analysis, follow the science, take time, and this was their whole science bit, to do it, to actually have the students, to meet the performance expectations of students would actually, and I just gave you the one, but to actually perform and develop experiments, ask questions, answer questions, collect, analyze, interpret data. Those big practices that we want to see them do. So again, the time might be worth it if the assessments make it worth it. Its time might be worth it if we think that the student learning and the literacy piece, if we can ever get to that, make it worth it. And the time is definitely worth it if we really think about what we want our students to be able to do rather than just know. So it's that figuring out piece. But it's a great question. It's one we struggle with a bit. Other questions? I'll try not to be so wordy as I can. Yes.
I mean, I think related to Cora's question, it seems like there's also the issue of helping teachers to, in a way, as they change their lessons to meet the demands of the next generation science standards, you're also asking essentially for more sophisticated curriculum development skills, right? Because you're having to weave together the disciplinary core ideas,
yes,
the practices to meet performance expectations, and it's not as cut and dry. And that's kind of a skill set that a lot of teachers may not be quite that comfortable in. It's a lot of thinking about the big picture. What are you going to cover? How are you going to knit everything together to address these different performance expectations, right?
And I'll flip that. I think we need to really respect teachers on what they're able to do, developing the assessments that are valid and reliable in your classroom because they are high stakes, and developing your own curriculum. What does that look like and how do we support it? That's a big move in San Francisco Unified School District where I work. Having curriculum development teams at classrooms at the level of district, but then at the level of school and level of department to actually do that and get all the teachers engaged in it. I think that's a necessary step. But I think there's also, we know that pushes up against the idea of, yes, we are a profession. Yes, we should be looked at as professionals. Yes, we should be looked at as being able to design curricula that has a high standard for all our students. And actually, I would push it that any of us who teach design the kind of assessments that actually can be used to look and monitor student achievement. And a lot of folks at many levels don't trust teachers. I'm just blunt about that. I'm going to say that softly. They figure we're not capable of doing that kind of work. One, we're either too biased or we're not going to really push our students. I find that most teachers I work with, that is not the case. especially, you know, I work in the STEM things, really thoughtful, who actually you have to give grades. Grading's hell, it is. But what does it mean to develop thoughtful assessments? So if say Lolly and I want to do research or anybody, that we can go into classrooms and not only get standardized test scores, which we have to, there's reasons for standard, but we can get real evaluations and real assessment from teachers that are meaningful because they've developed the curriculum, they thought about that, and they have really thoughtful goals and standards for their students.
Right, there's alignment between the design of the instruction and
Yeah, your assessment's really big. The biggest change for this, and I'll stop there, is the NGSS standards ask you to plan your curriculum backwards. You have the assessments, you have the goals for the assessment, and then you plan your curriculum moving back, not forward. That seems simple. I really love it, but I had experience with it because the international, have you guys ever do the International Baccalaureate? So you know IB, that's actually that kind of curriculum.
Yeah.
You're given an assessment. I loved it, so, and then you decide what you do in your classroom to have your students meet and perform based on the assessment standards, the performance expectations in your curriculum. But you're right, we'll have to do a lot of work with teachers to support that. Thank you all, appreciate it. You guys have a good afternoon.